Good day, learners! Today we're going to discuss the English 8 Quarter 1 Module 3, which is entitled Use of Modal Verbs, Nouns, and Adverbs, and this is only for Part 1 of this module. I have a question. Have you experienced expressing yourself the way it should be, but have the hard time in conveying your thoughts? In this module, you will learn on how to speak with urgency or importance, possibility, and emphasis through the use of modals. You will also learn the different types of modals and their uses. The most essential learning competency covered in this module is on how to use modal verbs, nouns, and adverbs appropriately. And specifically, you are expected to identify modal verbs, nouns, and adverbs used in sentences. Construct sentences using appropriate modal, verbs, nouns, and adverbs. Address different societal problems by writing ideas using different modals. And lastly, express appreciation of Afro-Asian cultures reflected in the story using modals. Alright, so let's have first an activity, what's in. So before this lesson, you learned about the proper ways of citing sources. Let us see if you can still remember some of the important concepts that we have discussed in our module 2, which is about writing bibliography. So the direction goes like this. Read each of the following situations. Write A if it is acceptable and NA if it is not acceptable in writing a bibliography. Number 1. A learner can get information from various websites and acknowledge the author by writing the sources used. Time's up. Let's check the answer. The answer is letter A, which means it is acceptable that the learners get information from various websites and acknowledge the author by writing the sources used. Number 2. A learner may not cite sources of information that he or she used in his or her research. Time's up. The answer is NA, or not applicable, which means that the learner should always cite the sources of information that he or she used in his or her research. Next is number 3. A research paper requisitely contains a bibliography written on a separate page and placed at the end part of the paper. Time's up. The answer is A. Applicable, which means that all research paper should have its bibliography or a separate sheet or page for its bibliography. Number 4. It is important to cite the sources of information that you used in your research because it will give credit to the author. Time's up. The answer is A. Applicable, which means that it is really important to cite the sources of information that you use, especially in your research paper. Lastly is number 5. In writing a bibliography, it is a necessity to use appropriate punctuations. Time's up. The answer is A. Applicable, which means that it is really necessary to use appropriate punctuations in writing bibliography. So that's it. We're done with our what's in, or our let's review activity. So what's your score? Did anyone got a perfect score? Very good. Take note of the italicized words used in each of the sentences. What do you think are these words? These words are called modals or modal expressions. So as we go through this module, you will also learn each of the different types of modals. Alright, you have just done reviewing your previous lesson on writing a bibliography. This time, as you go through the next activities, you will be learning about the correct use of modal verbs. So we have here an activity, What's New, entitled What's More Powerful. So we need to study and analyze the statements A and B. And after that, we will answer a set of questions about this. Okay, so we have for the statement A, all persons below 21 years old must stay at home during enhanced community quarantine. For statement B, all persons below 21 years old might stay at home during enhanced community quarantine. Alright, so as you can see, we have here a question. Which of the two statements would make a person below 21 years old feel sadder? So, which do you think? Is it statement A or statement B? Very good. It is statement A. So, notice the underlined words in the two statements, must and might. What do you think are these words? These words are examples of modal verbs. Very good. Alright, so did the previous activity help you? This part of the module will deepen your learning about modal verbs and their functions. First, read and examine the sentences below. For number 1, his 75-year-old mother is too old to ride a horse. Number 2, his 75-year-old mother might be too old to ride a horse. So what have you noticed in sentences 1 and 2? Do they have the same meaning? If not, what is their difference? Sentences 1 and 2 have different meanings. Sentence 1 states a fact that his mother is too old for horseback riding. Sentence 2 expresses the possibility that his mother could no longer do horseback riding due to her age. And our clues are the modals, too old, and might. The presence of the word might in sentence 2 makes the meaning different. The word might is an example of a modal expression that functions as a verb or action words. And aside from might, there are other commonly used modal expressions that function as a verb. And these are follows: may, can, shall, should, will, and would. Modal verbs. So what is modal verbs? Modal verbs are auxiliary or helping verbs which modify or change the meaning of the main verbs. You use modal verbs in giving advice or suggestions, in making requests, or in giving predictions and prohibitions. Again, when we say modal verbs, these are the auxiliary or helping verbs. By the use of this, we can change the meaning of the main verbs. And to show more of the other uses of modal verbs, here is a list with sample sentences. We have the columns, the row for use, modal, and sample sentence. Let's read it. So if you use the modal for really certain, we have the modals will, shall, must, won't, will not, shan't, shall not, can't, or cannot. When we say really certain, you are really sure. That's why we have here an example sentence. Jana's debut party will be planned secretly. Okay, so we use the modal will. Okay, so that expresses certainty. Next, very likely. Modals should, ought to. The sample sentence is, the traffic is not heavy. We should be there before the time. So that is very likely to happen, that if the traffic is not heavy, or if there is no traffic jam, they can arrive in their destination before the time. Next is possibility. Modals are may, might, could. Sample sentence is, it may rain today. So when we say possibility, it may happen or may not. Okay? Which means there is a chance. Next is strong obligation. Modals are must, have to, need to. Which means that when we use these modals, the verb or the plan should happen. Okay? Because it is a strong obligation. For sample sentence, we have, the plan must be accomplished without her knowing it. Okay? Next is weak obligation. Modals are should, ought to. Sample sentence, I should see a dentist. I have a bad breath, even though I brush my teeth regularly. Okay, so the situation here for the weak obligation is that it can do not promptly as for the strong obligation. It can be followed not as soon as possible, unlike for a strong obligation that should be addressed promptly. Okay? Next is no obligation. Modals needn't, need not, don't, need to, do not need to, don't have to, or do not have to. For sample sentence, we have, I need not brush my teeth now. I will just do it later. Okay? So this is the lowest type of obligation, the no obligation, which means that it depends upon the situation or depends upon the choice of the subject. Next set. Okay, so for permission, we have the modals can, may, could, might. For sample sentence, we have, may I borrow your pen? Okay, so this example is asking for a permission. Next, no permission. Can't, cannot, may not, or must not. So we have here a sample sentence. You cannot go out without a quarantine pass. Okay, so that is an example for no permission. Next is offer. You are offering something. Okay, the modals are will and shall. So the sample sentence, I will bring your things here. So that is an example of offer. For request, we have will, would, could. Sample sentence, will you open the windows? Okay, so you are asking a request. So it's up to the person that you talk to whether he or she will follow your request. Unlike for the command. Okay? Because commonly the command comes from a superior or a boss or the eldest. For example, eldest in the family. Next is promise. Modal will. Sample sentence, I will come back after sunset. Okay, so that is a promise. Next is for decision. Again, the modal that we will use is will. So the sample sentence, I will eat now. So that is an example of a decision. Next is advice and suggestion. Modals are shall, should, shouldn't, should not. Sample sentence, you should wear appropriate attire for your job interview. So that is an advice or a suggestion. Next is ability. Modal can, could. Sample sentence, the students can sing harmoniously. So when we say ability, this is something that you can do or you can perform. Or it can also something that is your talent. Okay, and lastly, we have the general truth. The modal that we can use is can and may. So the sample sentence is, we can avoid the COVID-19 by following health protocols. So generally, that is true. If you will follow the health protocol, you can avoid to be infected by the COVID-19. Another example for general truth is something that has something to do with your faith in God. Okay, so that's it. We're done with the modals and its uses and the sample sentences. Okay, so for you to better understand what modals or modal expressions are, enjoy doing the series of activities that follow. So we have here, let's practice an activity, and it is entitled Printed Shirt. So if you were Andy, Andy is the name of the girl here, which of the shirts would you want to wear? So what are you going to choose? And please notice the modal verbs printed on each shirt. So the first question is, which printed shirt expresses obligation? Time's up. The answer is shirt number 3. You must follow me. Okay, and the modal that we use is must. That expresses obligation. Very good. Next is, which shirt expresses ability? Time's up. The answer is shirt number 2. I can play any musical instrument. The modal that we use is can, which expresses ability. Next, which shirt expresses permission? Time's up. The answer is shirt number 4. May I go now? Alright, so next. Which of the shirt expresses request? Time's up. The answer is shirt number 1. Could you open the door for me? And the modal that we use is could, which used to ask a request. And lastly, which shirt expresses willingness? Time's up. The answer is the fifth or last shirt, which has the statement, I will eat now. And the modal that we use is will. Alright, so we're done with our activity 1, which is the printed shirt. Now, let's move to our next activity, which is about pick it right. Then, the direction is you have to determine the function of the underlined modal verb as used in the sentence. So, for number 1, we have this question. Could you help me read this book? Is it A, offer, B, permission, C, promise, or D, request? Time's up. The answer is letter D, request. Next, number 2, I will go there now. Is it A, ability, B, decision, C, permission, or D, promise? Time's up. The answer is letter B, decision. Next is number 3. May I sit here with you? Is it A, decision, B, offer, C, permission, or D, request? Time's up. The answer is C, permission. Next, for number 4, I can perform magic using coins. Is it A, ability, B, general truth, C, offer, or D, promise? Time's up. The answer is letter A, ability. For the last activity, we have number 5. You must follow the doctor's advice. Is it A, no obligation, B, permission, C, strong obligation, or D, weak obligation? Time's up. The answer is letter C, strong obligation. Okay, so that's it. We're done with our activity. So I hope that most of you got a perfect score. And it's time for our activity time. Okay, so for your activity, you have to answer the following activities on one whole sheet of paper. For part 1, you need to answer the assessment 2 that can be found in your module on page 8. So that is 1 to 5 items. So you just need to choose the correct word, but you may just write the letter of your correct answer. Okay, for number 2, part 2, reading selection. So you need to read The Story of the Aged Mother by Matsuo Basho, and answer the assessment 3, which is entitled Share Now. The story and the question can be found from page 8, 9, and 10. Okay, so again, that's page 8, 9, and 10. You need first to read the story before you can answer the assessment. Okay, so for the last part, what I have learned, it is on page 10. You need to draw and copy the My Diary before answering. And you can just do it at the back of your paper. Again, I will repeat, you need to draw the illustration just like what you have on page 10. You just need to copy it. Then you need to complete the paragraph by writing down the things that you have learned about modal verbs. Again, that is the instructions, and I hope that all of you understand our lesson and the instruction for our activity. Okay, so if you have any question, you may just send me personal message, then I will answer your question. Alright, so that's all for Module 3, Part 1. I will again send you the link for the Part 2 and 3 of this Module 3. So keep safe and God bless us all. And please have an advanced reading for the part 2 of this module, which is about the modal nouns. And you can also have advanced reading for the part 3, which is about the modal adverbs. Okay, so that's it. Again, if you have any question, you can just send me a PM. This has been Ma'am Rovi, your English 8 teacher. Goodbye!